Today is Thursday, June 25th, 2026, and today is National Catfish Day, which means it's the perfect time to talk about famous battles, radioactive elements, and color television. I'm beginning to suspect these national days are not much help. But after digging through today's stories, I noticed that they all had something in common. Each one changed the way people looked at the world. The battle that became American legend, a scientific discovery that transformed medicine, and a television broadcast that finally brought color into millions of living rooms. Welcome to Wait, That's Random, This Day in History. I'm C.L. Burns, voice actor, audiobook narrator, and your guide through the moments where humanity somehow became both impressive and ridiculous simultaneously. On June 25, 1876, the Battle of Little Bighorn began in what is now Montana. Most people know it by another name, Custer's Last Stand. The nickname tells you something important. For decades, much of the story focused almost entirely on Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer and the defeat of the 7th Cavalry. But history has become much more complete since then. Today, historians place equal emphasis on the Lakota Sioux, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors whose coordinated resistance led to one of the U.S. Army's most famous defeats. Leaders including Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse, and Gall played critical roles in the victory. The battle occurred during growing tensions over the U.S. government's attempt to force Native American tribes onto reservations, particularly after gold was discovered in the Black Hills, land that had been guaranteed to the Lakota by treaty. Custer underestimated both the size of the encampment and the determination of the people defending it. The result was decisive. More than 260 soldiers were killed, including Custer himself. What fascinates me isn't just the battle. It's how its story has changed over time. For generations, it was often presented as the story of one man's heroic last stand. Today, it's increasingly understood as a much more complex event involving broken treaties, competing perspectives, and remarkable indigenous leadership. History doesn't change. Our understanding of it does. And speaking of discoveries that changed how people understood the world, one of the most important scientific announcements in history happened on this day. On June 25, 1903, Marie Curie announced the discovery of radium. It's difficult to overstate how revolutionary this was. At the time, scientists were only beginning to understand radioactivity. The idea that certain elements could continuously emit energy without burning or changing in the traditional sense challenged long-held assumptions about matter itself. Working alongside her husband Pierre Curie, Marie spent years processing enormous quantities of pitchblende ore. Not pounds, tons. The work was exhausting, repetitive, and often physically dangerous. Although no one yet understood the risks of prolonged radiation exposure. What emerged from that effort changed science forever. Radium became a key part of early research into atomic physics and eventually contributed to medical treatments, particularly in the fight against cancer. Marie Curie would go on to become the first person to ever win 2 Nobel Prizes in different scientific fields. One thing I always find remarkable is how often world-changing discoveries begin with years of patient, almost invisible work. No dramatic breakthroughs, no overnight success, just relentless curiosity. Some discoveries changed laboratories, others changed living rooms. On June 25, 1951, CBS aired the first commercial color television broadcast in the United States. To modern viewers, that may not sound especially impressive. We've become accustomed to ultra-high-definition televisions that fit on our walls. But imagine growing up in a world where every television picture had always been black and white. Then suddenly, color. The first broadcasts were limited. Very few people even owned compatible televisions. The technology itself still had significant hurdles to overcome. In fact, CBS's system would eventually lose out of a different color standard adoption by the industry. But that's not what makes this moment important. Broadcast proved that television didn't have to remain black and white forever. It gave people a glimpse of what the future could look like. And one thing I enjoy about old advertisements for color television is how excited people were by something we now take completely for granted. Today, we'd probably complain if the colors on our TV look slightly off. Back then, simply seeing color on a television screen felt like stepping into tomorrow. And after spending today's episode around moments that changed how people saw the world, it's fitting to end with someone who has spent a career encouraging people to look at the world a little differently. Born on June 25, 1961 in Reading, England, Ricky Gervais helped redefine modern television comedy. Before The Office, many sitcoms relied on polished jokes, obvious punchlines, and larger-than-life characters. Gervais took a different approach. He leaned into awkwardness, silence, embarrassment, the uncomfortable moments most people try to avoid. The result was a comedy that felt remarkably real. The original British version of The Office became enormously influential, inspiring adaptations around the world, including the hugely successful American version. Beyond television, Gervais has built a career as a stand-up comedian, writer, actor, filmmaker, and one of the most recognizable award show hosts in recent memory. Whether people agree with his style or not, it's difficult to deny the impact on comedy. He proved that sometimes the funniest moments aren't the ones where everyone laughs. They're the ones where everyone isn't quite sure whether they should. And looking back across today's stories, I noticed something interesting. Every generation has moments where the world suddenly looks different. Sometimes it's because historians reconsider an old story. Sometimes it's because scientists discover something no one knew existed. Sometimes it's because technology changes what people see every evening in their own homes. The world itself doesn't transform overnight. Our understanding of it does. Anyway, that's what I ended up finding while working through June 25th. And before I go, here's today's oddly appropriate quote. The important thing is not to stop questioning. Curiosity has its own reason for existing. Albert Einstein. If you'd like to explore more of my narration work, projects, or general historical wandering, you can find it all at waitthat'srandom.com. I'm C.L. Burns, and I appreciate you stopping by the timeline for a while. I'll see you tomorrow.